As his troops die in droves in Ukraine, Russia's oil terminals burn, and his allies across the globe are weakened or taken out. Putin at least had Africa to hold on to. There, Russia still had influence, a voice, power, but all of that is disappearing. Russia just took a major hit in Africa, as a historic humiliation in Mali spells doom for Putin. Russia's leader was just backstabbed, and the fallout for Putin is going to be a lot worse than it looks on the surface. Everything centers on Russia's Africa Corps. Created from the ashes of the Wagner mercenary group that Russia has been using for years to help Mali's government retain control over its people, the Africa Corps was supposed to be protectors, guardians of the Malian government and spreaders of Putin's influence in Africa. But on April 27th, all of that went up in smoke. In the northern city of Kidal, which was an Africa Corps stronghold and is a key regional center in Mali, a coordinated attack by several insurrectionist groups led to the combined Russian and Malian forces being isolated, surrounded, and then kicked out of town. The strike came in the wake of a series of attacks that combined the forces of these insurrectionist groups launched all across Mali against Russian and government forces, with the Africa Corps claiming that the operation involved around 12,000 fighters. That hasn't been officially verified. What is verified is the gunfire in the Malian capital of Bamako, the drone strikes, and the car bombs. Mali's defense minister Sadio Kamara is now dead, one of the victims of a car bombing that also claimed 2 of his grandchildren and his second wife. The insurrectionists, which include the Azawad Liberation Front, which is filled with Tuareg separatists, and the Group for the Support of Islam and Muslims, which Arab News says is linked to al-Qaeda, are attacking Mali's military junta across the entire nation. None of this was supposed to happen. There's a level of coordination here that Putin never expected. This is a major humiliation for Russia that has all sorts of ramifications that we'll be digging into soon. But heading back to Kidal, the Allied forces that attacked the city, which is home to a military base, have showcased just how ineffective Russia's Africa Corps can be. The Russian mercenaries who were supposed to protect their Malian junta partners ended up being trapped inside the perimeter of their base. Rather than trying to fight their way out, the Africa Corps and the Malian army instead worked out an agreement with the insurrectionists. There would be no more bloodshed. The Africa Corps would instead leave their camp with their tails tucked between their legs. As they left, the Russian and Malian forces torched the equipment at the camp in a desperate attempt to stop it from falling into enemy hands. This is the Russian strength that Mali's junta was supposed to be able to trust. The Africa Corps has just revealed itself to be a paper tiger. Perhaps the 2 most damaging aspects of all this come from the work that has been undone and the equipment that has been lost. About 2.5 years before the insurrectionists reclaimed Kidal, Putin's forces in Mali had pulled off one of their biggest power plays yet. They had stormed into the city and held their flag aloft after successfully snatching Kidal from the Tuareg rebels. At the time, this was what Mali needed to see, a strong force enabling its junta to battle back against the separatists that opposed it. And for the past 30 months, the Africa Corps and Mali's junta have been working together to hold on to Kidal. The April insurrection has undone all of that work in a matter of days. Egg is on Putin's face, and more has followed via an examination of Russia's equipment losses in Kidal. According to Militani, Russia's mercenaries lost a BTR-82A armored personnel carrier, a Tornado U armored vehicle, and a Chinese-made VP-11 armored vehicle. Russia also claims to have experienced some losses within the Africa Corps, though it hasn't clarified how many. It's also not known what has happened to the BMP-3, Tiger M, and Spartak 590951 armored vehicles that the Corps was using in their battle against the insurrectionists. It doesn't seem likely that those vehicles left Kidal with the Africa Corps when Russia's mercenaries negotiated their withdrawal. They were more likely burned or captured. This is the sort of hardware that was meant to stop anything like this from happening in Kidal. Now Russia's lost vehicles are a monument to how weak its power base in Mali really is. Mali's junta might have been able to see this coming if it weren't so hell-bent on working alongside Russia to maintain its own power. Back in July 2024, that junta had gotten a taste of what happens when Russian mercenaries tangle with Tuareg fighters. The mercenaries, who were members of the Wagner group that has morphed into the Africa Corps, lost badly. Dozens of them died in a battle with the Tuareg forces near the Algerian border, along with several junta members. That was the junta's clue: Russia's protection isn't worth what Putin claims it to be. Ulf Leising, who is an analyst at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, which has stationed him in Mali, says what happened in Kidal is nothing less than an abject failure for Russia. The Russians, they were there to improve the security situation. I mean, they claimed they were achieving the goals, and now they're leaving in a very humiliating way, Leising tells Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. If you see what they're leaving behind, like entire drone stations, I mean, the Africa Corps, Russia pretended to do a lot of things, but in the end, they failed, he adds. The Africa Corps has been crippled in Mali. Now, Russia is engaging in as much damage control as it can. The Washington Post reported that the leader of the Malian junta had met with the Russian ambassador to Mali, Igor Gromyko, to discuss next steps on April 28th. Russia used the opportunity to decry the insurrection as a coup attempt, while Mali's junta leader, Assimi Goïta, used the opportunity to show his face for the first time since the fall of Kidal. Goïta tried to project strength. In a television address that followed the meeting, he claimed that military operations will continue until the armed groups involved have been completely neutralized and security has been sustainably restored throughout the country. It's all well and good to threaten this type of action, but the optics of what just happened aren't in favor of Mali's junta. It has just been kicked out of a key regional stronghold by the very armed groups that Goïta claims will soon be neutralized. That's not a good look, especially when the junta evacuated alongside a bunch of Russian mercenaries. As for Russia, it isn't saying much. Outside of labeling the attack a coup attempt and confirming there have been casualties, Russia's foreign ministry has offered very few details on Russia's involvement in the whole affair. Russia's military bloggers haven't been quite so secretive, The Guardian reports. They're trying to commend the Africa Corps for minimizing the casualties experienced by Mali's ruling junta. This is more like damage control than an accurate reflection of what happened during a 3-day fight that cost Russia a foothold in one of Mali's most strategically important cities. The reality is that Russia has just been humiliated on an Africa-wide stage. And this humiliation runs so much deeper. What looks on the surface to be an isolated instance of Russian mercenaries getting run out of town is actually far more damaging to Putin than he would want you to believe. The consequences of what just happened are going to be massive, and we're going to tell you what they are. But before we do, this is why we make the military show, to explain how power really moves. If you're new to the channel, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Now, to understand why what just happened in Mali was so damaging to Putin, we need to explore what the Africa Corps operations in the country really meant to Russia. Mali was supposed to be a stronghold and a testing ground for Russia inside Africa. The country itself often seems like little more than a blip on the global geopolitical radar. You might hear about the occasional coup attempt or terrorist attack, but Mali is far from a power player on the worldwide stage. However, Mali has, for years, been at the epicenter of a power struggle between Russia and the West. Russia seemed to have come out on top in that struggle. Rewinding to 2013, Mali's government was jubilant when French soldiers arrived in the country to battle against militants who had hijacked a rebellion and threatened to overrun the country. A 5,000-strong contingent of French soldiers was sent to Mali, and for a while it seemed that the West had won the battle for Malian hearts. But in 2021, French President Emmanuel Macron made a decision that changed everything. He announced that France would be withdrawing half the force that it had sent to Mali. The outcry was immediate. Mali's prime minister at the time, Choguel Maïga, accused France of abandoning Mali, which led to a furious response from Macron, who then condemned Mali's military government as having no democratic legitimacy, following 2 coups in the country in less than a year. Division was apparent. Public opinion in Mali also turned against having French soldiers, who some saw as colonialists on their territory. Russia saw all of this and noticed there was an opportunity to fill a power vacuum. It wasn't long after the conflict with France that it emerged that Russia was offering up Wagner mercenaries to fill the gap left by France's departed soldiers. Many in Mali welcomed the move, perhaps believing Russia to be a more neutral party that wouldn't be interested in Malian politics, the BBC reports. A naive belief, of course, but one that cleared the way for Russia to deliver a symbolic shot to France and the collective West as it developed more influence in Africa. This two birds with one stone approach worked. Over the last few years, Russia's influence in Mali has grown. By August 2024, Mali had cut diplomatic ties with Ukraine, with its government claiming that Ukrainian officials had made statements supporting the Tuareg separatist rebels. There were also claims that Ukraine's intelligence services had been involved in the battle between separatists and the Malian junta near the Algerian border, which only led to Mali isolating itself further. Russia was rubbing its hands. The Africa Corps test was working as its tendrils burrowed deeper into Mali. Russia offered protection and manpower. It dripped honey into the junta's ear to poison it against Ukraine and the West, and it was all working. A model for the expansion of Russia's influence elsewhere in Africa seemed to be in the making, and it was all based on the strength that the Russian military and its associated mercenary groups could offer. But underneath all of Putin's scheming, there was always fragility. That has just been exposed in Kidal, and there are 3 problems that Russia's failure to protect its Malian partners in that key city has created. First, there's the fact that Russia couldn't see the unification of the fighting forces that ended up expelling the Africa Corps from Kidal coming. This is a huge problem. Beyond pure firepower and protection, Russia is supposed to be able to leverage a global intelligence network that allows it to get ahead of problems like this. Russia failed to do that in Mali. Rebel forces coordinated to a degree that Russia never anticipated, which demonstrates that desire to get rid of Mali's junta is so strong that it can overcome the ideological differences between the Tuareg separatists and the Islamic militants who have joined forces. If Russia's strength in Mali and elsewhere in Africa lies in exploiting division, then this example of unity is the last thing that Putin would have wanted to see. That will worry Putin, and all of the performative meetings in the world aren't going to change the fact that Mali's ruling junta is now in serious trouble. The rebel group is attacking all over Mali, whether directly, as in Kidal, or with the car bombings and other actions that we've seen in Mali's capital. Chaos may be good for Russia, but that chaos has to evolve into control. Russia has that control through Mali's junta, and the control is slipping through Putin's fingers and into the hands of a unified force. The sheer scale of the offensive could be enough to displace Mali's junta, which would put Putin right back to square one in his attempts to influence this small African nation. But behind this immediate problem lies something much worse for Russia. We said earlier that Mali was something of a test case for the Africa Corps. What that test was supposed to prove was that Russia could be the protector of any African nation that came calling. That was the whole point of replacing the withdrawing French forces in Mali with mercenaries. Don't worry about cozying up to the West, Russia has you covered. Early 2025 saw Russia back up that promise with a trio of convoys into Bamako that delivered armored vehicles, tanks, and other supplies. However, this has all ended up being an illusion of strength, rather than the very real military power that Mali's junta needed. When the Africa Corps came under its first true test in Kidal, it failed. Russia's claims of protecting junta fighters are weak. What we've seen is the Africa Corps get surrounded and then surrender to make its way out of a sticky situation. Think about what that means for Russia elsewhere in Africa. If this is the fighting force that is supposed to establish Russia as the major external security force on the African continent, then the other nations that Russia is courting are going to be taking notice. And it's not just Russia's failure in Mali that they'll see. The past few years are littered with instances of Russia promising security, only to fail to protect its allies. In the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Russia failed to provide the security that it promised. In Syria, the fall of the Assad regime can be traced back to Russia once again failing to live up to the power that it claims to have. Even the recent case of former Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro is an example of a Russian ally crumbling while Putin does nothing to protect them. And right now in Iran, which has been providing drones to Russia ever since Putin invaded Ukraine, Russia does nothing but sit back and complain about Operation Epic Fury. At least Russia has mercenaries and equipment in Mali, but both failed once they faced a coordinated attack by rebels. Russia is a protector. How can any nation in Africa truly believe that after seeing what it's seen over the last few years? Kidal isn't an isolated example. It's part of a pattern of paper protection being exposed. The Africa Corps has just been humiliated on multiple levels. As a security force, it failed to prevent the car bombing that claimed the life of Mali's defense minister. In Kidal, it failed to function as a fighting force that could repel any attacks by rebels who may be unified, but don't have the sort of equipment that Russia brings to the table. All of this is made worse by the fact that Russia wasn't helping Mali's junta in secret. It has publicly committed, which means Putin doesn't even have the sort of plausible deniability that has allowed him to brush off Russian failures in the past. What just happened in Mali was very public, and it leads into the third problem Russia now faces. Whatever ambitions Putin had for Africa are on the verge of ruin. Building alliances on the back of your strength only works when you have the strength to deliver. The loss of Kidal demonstrates that the Africa Corps doesn't seem to have the strength or organization of the Wagner Group. Wagner at least experienced some successes in Mali before its leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, rebelled against Putin and wound up being killed. The Corps born from the ashes of that group simply isn't as good at spreading Russian influence in Africa. Everything that Putin does on the African continent is born from opportunism. If Russia sees division or instability, it capitalizes. That's how Putin builds influence. But as the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace notes, Russia has been struggling to bring some of the more stable African states on board. Many of those states have historical ties to Russia that they maintain, but they haven't welcomed Russian mercenaries into their territory, and they certainly aren't cutting ties with the other partners in the West or China to accept Putin's help. Putin was using Mali as part of a long game to make Russia a dominant external force in Africa, and all of that has just fallen on its face. The most powerful nations weren't falling over themselves to let Russia isolate them from the West before. Now they've just been proven right in their decisions. There's also a darker aspect of Putin's attempts to spread Russian influence in Africa. Toward the end of February, Ukrainian intelligence revealed that Russia has built a network of fraudulent schemes that it's been using to lure African people into fighting as part of the war in Ukraine. At the time of the report, there were 1,780 citizens from the African continent fighting in Ukraine, hailing from 36 countries across the continent. Russia lured these unsuspecting fighters in with promising jobs and visas, only to send them to the front lines. That deception is only made possible because of Russia's ability to weave its way into nations like Mali. Combine this outright fraud with the collapse of Russia's status as a protector to smaller nations, and you get a dangerous recipe for the destruction of influence. Mali was supposed to be a symbol of Russia overcoming the West in a far-flung territory. After Kidal, it may be the catalyst for a complete turnaround of Russia's fortunes in Africa. The only possible way that Putin could stem the bleeding for Russia is by assisting Mali's junta in overcoming the rebel threat that it now faces. But how can Russia do that? One of the reasons it's proven so weak in Mali is that Russia can't spare the type of military assistance the junta needs. Putin is too wrapped up in the Ukraine war, and he needs every soldier and piece of hardware he can get to continue his invasion. Russia has already lost over 1.3 million people and tens of thousands of units of equipment in Ukraine. Any force that it sends overseas, even if it's a mercenary force, is going to be hampered by the effects of a multi-year war that has severely weakened Russia itself. The Afrika Korps in Mali is likely all that the junta is going to get, and if the unified rebels keep on building on their successes, we may be about to see a repeat of what happened in Syria. It starts with a major hit, then a regime collapses. Finally, Russia loses yet another ally and sphere of influence, further crippling Putin's attempts to cast himself as one of the world's foremost geopolitical figures. And as Putin watches his influence collapse, he has had a healthy dose of salt rubbed into his wounds by Ukraine. Russia's greatest enemy is only going from strength to strength on the influence front, and it's proving that unity overcomes preying on division every day of the week. Take Ukraine's budding partnership with Japan as an example. Japan has done something incredible to help Ukraine against Russia, and an alliance has been formed that will have an impact on both Russia and Ukraine for years to come. If you want to find out more, then check out our video about the Japanese Terra A1 drone that is heading into Ukraine. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to The Military Show so you never miss our analysis of the world's most important geopolitical events. And thank you as always for watching.